Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Audrey Lau, and I am the Adult and Senior Services Specialist with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. With me today are my co-hosts, Tiana Davis and Kyla Hannington, with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, the county's Civil and Human Rights, Education and Enforcement Agency, and our partners for the Lunch and Learn series, as well as many other programs that we do throughout the week. We are thrilled today to welcome poet Frank X. Walker in conversation about his collection, Load in 9 Times, which is going to be backwards for all you, but in which he reimagines the experiences of Black Civil War soldiers, including his own ancestors who enlisted in the Union Army in exchange for emancipation. A native of Danville, Kentucky, Frank X. Walker is the first African-American writer to be named Kentucky Poet Laureate. Walker has published 13 collections of poetry, including Turn Me Loose, The Unghosting of Medgar Evers, which was awarded the 2014 NAACP Image Award for Poetry, and the Black Caucus American Library Association Honor Award for Poetry. He is also the author of Buffalo Dance, The Journey of York, winner of the 2004 Lillian Smith Book Award, and Isaac Murphy, I Dedicate This Ride, which he adapted for stage, earning him the Paul Green Foundation Playwrights Fellowship Award. His poetry was also dramatized for the 2016 Contemporary American Theater Festival in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, and staged by Message Theater for the 2015 Breeders' Cup Festival. A lover of comics, as we all are here, Walker curated We Wear the Mask, Black Superheroes Through the Ages, an exhibit of his personal collection of action figures, comics, and related memorabilia at the Lyric Theater and Cultural Arts Center in 2015. He reprised the exhibit in 2018 at Purdue University and Western Carolina University. Walker recently returned to the world of visual art with a collection of new and early multimedia works, Black Star Seed, When... I'm going to need help with that. My cyan find the words. I'm guessing that is like some sort of thing that I probably really messed up, which is on exhibit at the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning in Lexington. Voted one of the most creative professors in the South, Professor X coined the term Afrolachia and co-founded the Afrolachian Poets, subsequently publishing the most celebrated eponymous collection. His honors also include a 2004 Lannan Literary Fellowship for Poetry, the 2008 and 2009 Denny C. Plattner Award for Outstanding Poetry and Appalachian Heritage, the 2013 West Virginian Humanities Council's Appalachian Heritage Award, as well as fellowships and residencies with, oh my gosh, you all did this to me on purpose, Cave Canem, the National Endowment of the Humanities, and the Kentucky Arts Council. In 2020, Professor X received the Donald Justice Award for Poetry from the Fellowship of Southern Writers, and he is the recipient of honorary doctorates from the University of Kentucky, Transylvania University, Spalding University, and Centre College. Professor X is the founding editor of Pluck, the Journal of Afrolachian Arts and Culture, and serves as the professor of English and African American and Africana Studies at the University of Kentucky in Lexington. Now that I have messed up at least 16 words there, Professor X, thank you for being here. Could you get us started on your work?
Thanks for having me. And you didn't mess up that many words. Thank you. It's exhausting, though. I feel like I'm aging as I hear that introduction. We got to find a way to make that a lot shorter. But I'm here and I'm happy to talk about a book, and it's going to be easier because I have a PowerPoint that will hop on the screen even as we speak. There are a lot of slides in this presentation, so some of them I will zoom through, some I'll give you a chance to lean in and read the titles, but they're just to move us through a conversation. This conversation includes some reading of poems that are embedded in the PowerPoint, at the end of which there'll be time for Q&A. So if you're ready to dive in, we're looking at an image taken at Camp Nelson. This is from a set of photographs that are in the archives at the University of Kentucky's library. And one of the things about this collection that makes it very different from most traditional collections of poetry is that this is very archival intensive. Much of the work was generated based on using Civil War era documents, including pension files and ads and pamphlets and archival pension files and all kinds of other records. And one of the things that became available that allowed me to respond to this conversation about, even though this is about the Civil War, it's more about Black families in Kentucky before, during, and after the Civil War. And so I have a chance to talk about Kentucky's kind of reputation and some mythology around Kentucky and the Civil War. And one of those, the first pressing mythology is this idea that Kentucky was a great place to be enslaved. I remember in middle school, that quote was actually uttered by one of my history teachers. And so that was based on this idea that because Kentucky slave owners owned so few slaves as a group, it implied that there were no plantations. So this first poem that appears in the book is actually an abecedarian that actually recounts over 75 plantations that were active in Kentucky and owned large numbers of enslaved people. And most people don't have this information because many of these places are now shopping malls and other kinds of institutions. They just drop the word plantation out of the title. So this poem, Ain't No Plantations in Kentucky, is a poem that appears in the collection. This is an example of some of the archival material and what's happening at UK. The libraries are coordinated with Cornell University's Freedom on the Move project to digitize all these amazing historical records, especially from newspapers. And one of the things they wanted to make sure they tried to find was every single runaway slave ad that appeared as a published item in newspapers from the colonial period to 1865. And I had a chance to use some of these resources for this collection. Here are some examples of those, some of those ads that reference Kentucky and similar regional spaces. And the thing I was most interested in is this idea that it showcases the idea that people were property. But in most cases, the ads always depicted the enslaved individuals as victims, always, and never suggesting other stories. But one of the things we were able to resurrect from these stories were other ways to celebrate the challenge that they face, the commitment to family, the resilience, the creativity they use to try to escape and self-liberate and find their way to freedom. And some of these ads actually showcase that information, and the poems do the same thing. These two ads, the more famous one is on the left because it was written by Frederick Douglass. And I think this version is also in the Smithsonian Museum in DC. It's a large leaflet that basically recruits African-American men to join the Union Army. The one on the right is actually a similar version that was designed for Kentucky specifically, central Kentucky specifically. The recruiting office in Lexington and Danville on the Turnpike is very near the space I grew up and lived for most of my young life. And it lists Camp Nelson as the destination point. And Camp Nelson is one of those Civil War sites people recognize as soon as they hear the name, but what they mostly don't know about the place is that it was also a refugee site. So in addition to being a place to train soldiers, many of those soldiers brought their family with them when they self-liberated or made their way to Camp Nelson or were stationed there. They came with family members, and those family members populated what became the thousands of people that not only lived there in barracks, they were provided clothing and food, given some job training, were able to go to church and to school. And for those reasons, it was the first truly free space in Kentucky. This is on the right side of this document, opposite these special dates, showcases two enlistment cards that are very personal to me because Henry Walker and Randall Edlin both were my third great-great-grandfathers, and both of them were stationed at Camp Nelson and as part of the Union Army. And this is part of my motivation for writing this particular book, was to kind of interrogate my own family history and find out where it intersected the national history and the conversation about the Civil War in Kentucky. And especially the part about the myths that it propagated. This beautiful photo of the 107th U.S. Colored Infantry taken at Fort Woodbury in Arlington, Virginia, very near where most of you all are soldiers from Kentucky, organized in Louisville, Kentucky. So we're extra proud of this particular image for that reason. Some details about Kentucky that are significant. When you look at the numbers of African Americans who enlisted by state, and you recognize these bold numbers, that Louisiana appears to have a few more enlistees than Kentucky. But the truth is, almost 5,000 Kentuckians self-liberated, ran away, left Kentucky to join the Union Army in other states. So the true numbers are more like 28,000 African-American men who joined the Union Army and participated in their liberation and fought for the freedom for their families and themselves to change the face of history. And this is something that is rarely discussed in history books, even in Kentucky. So I was extra motivated to have this conversation on the page as a poet / novice historian. The image on the left is a picture of Sergeant Major Charles Singer, who was a free man who joined in Kentucky and became an officer. Some of the poems in this collection are persona poems, and there's one that is in the voice of Charles Singer. We won't talk about that one today, but it's one of the many poems that showcases the point of view of soldiers who participated in this period in history. This is an image that showcases the fact that Camp Nelson was a refugee camp. You know, there's a large barracks in the background, and you see some of the occupants of that particular building in the foreground. A close-up image of that same photo shows you all these children. I think most of these are young men, even though their clothing appears to be the same clothing as adults. You know, there was no children's clothing store for these young individuals. And I love the fact that they all wear hats, you know, like their fathers and grandfathers. And to the far right, just under the window, there's even a young man who has on a soldier's uniform. He could have been a drummer attached to one of the regiments. This image is a picture of an all-girls classroom at Camp Nelson, just outside of the actual schoolhouse there. You can also see the teacher in the foreground and a minister on the far right sitting on the back bench. They were part of the individuals who provided this education. Here's another picture of families in front of their houses at the refugee camp at Camp Nelson. Another image provided by the University of Kentucky Archives, which are very instrumental in providing all this background research material. This is a set of dates. One of the things about this particular book is the back of the book includes a bibliography, a timeline of notes, extensive notes, about 7 pages of notes from individual poems that are important to the story. Speaking of archival documents that I mentioned earlier, these are examples of digitized information that's part of a resource bank here in Kentucky called Reckoning Inc. And they've digitized as many records as they could find connected to Kentucky Union soldiers that include affidavits, pension files, all of their documents connected to when they first enlisted, and then their monthly comments that were taken at roll call, and you can find out, where people were stationed and moved all around the country. This particular one is from my third great grandfather, Randall Edeland, that talks about an injury he sustained at Fort Bliss, Texas. And this injury became part of his story because it left him 50% disabled and almost impossible to work and earn a living after the Civil War was over. And there were 99 pages of documents, mostly affidavits, that his widow had filed in an attempt to collect a pension that he was owed and that she inherited after he had passed away. And the file was 99 pages long because it took her almost 10 years before they would recognize that she was actually telling the truth. And those affidavits included proof that they had actually been married in 1842, that they had produced children, that he actually enlisted where he said he enlisted in Lebanon, Kentucky, that he was stationed at Camp Nelson, and that he was dead. And they had to prove that with these affidavits that appeared in the previous slide. This is a close-up of what I discovered after looking at her affidavits for almost a month and not recognizing that her name was a little different every time. In between Mary and Edeland, it says her Mark, which meant that she was illiterate. And somebody else was writing Mary Edeland, and she would just put in that X or cross or whatever her mark would become. And this happened for all individuals who were illiterate and could not read and write. And in that case, they also had to have two people who were literate vouch that they were actually who they said they were. And I use this example because after almost 10 years of affidavits, towards the end of that, the two people who were witnessing her signature were actually her children, two of her sons, William Edeland and Scott Edeland. And you can tell even from the quality of the signatures which one is older and has more education and who's been writing longer. Obviously that's William. And so this became, a really defining point for me to press through and finish the research material and write these poems. More information deals with June 19th, or as we call it, Juneteenth, based on General Order Number 3, given in Galveston, Texas. These images you see are actually ads placed after emancipation in local newspapers and newspapers in the region. People know what want ads are, but there were a set of ads called Information Wanted. And this is what happened with families who lost loved ones, who had run away, who had been sold south, who they hadn't seen for however long it was, and they were still trying to find them. These ads appeared all over the country, placed by individuals trying to find their spouses, their children, their loved ones. This example on the right, under Robert Williams, it says, information wanted of our 5 children whom we have not seen for 4 years. The names are as follows: Josephine, age 20, Celia, age 14, Caroline, age 13, Ellen, age 10, and Augusta, age 8 years old. They were in Charlotte, North Carolina at Rock Hill when we last heard from them. Any information concerning these children will be thankfully received by their mother. Our address is Augusta, Georgia. So imagine, without the advent of technology, all you could do is travel by horseback or on foot and go whatever direction you thought was most logical just to try to find your children. And this is another little known activity in the annals of our history. That's, obviously American history. This is a quote from former soldier. And this is an example of one of the poems that talk about post-Reconstruction challenges that African Americans face, especially those who had been soldiers. I'll slow down here because these two documents are two examples of more archival information that was produced in the same year. Both of these were produced in 1853, and they tell a very different story of Kentucky. The thing on the left actually holds the lyrics to My Old Kentucky Home, which is the state song, even today, written by Stephen Foster. But the thing about this particular cover is that it was advertised as a song sung by Christie's minstrels. And you need to know that that's a very telling detail, because it connects the song to the history of minstrelsy. And if you don't know anything about minstrelsy, it's worth looking up, because imagine white performers in blackface with red or white lips, or caricatures of Black people making fun of or presenting these caricatures of what they thought Black people sounded like and behaved like as entertainment. It was the number one entertainment in the country, minstrelsy. They played the sold out audiences all over the United States, from New York to Louisiana. And My Old Kentucky Home is a song that came from that tradition, written in that tradition, and performed in that tradition, and is now a very risky state song. Some people hang on to the song because they think it's tradition and history and they won't let it go. Others, like myself, who know about the history, think it's inappropriate as a state song, and it disrespects the history. To have a song that celebrates enslavement be a state song. In the same time period, this ad on the right ran, and it's an advertisement to recruit the selling of Negroes. And I wanted to try to have this conversation on the page as a poet, and this is where I move into the poetry part of this. Imagine taking this song and this ad and meshing them together into a poem. This is what that poem looks like, and I'll read this poem and a few others afterwards as we move towards the end of the discussion. This is my response to why I don't stand when they sing the state song and I live in this state. Because this is what I think when I hear the song. Why I don't stand. Oh, the sun shines bright on my old Kentucky home. $1,200 to $1,250 for Negroes. 'Tis summer, the darkies are gay. The undersigned wishes to purchase a large lot of Negroes. Well, corn tops ripe for the New Orleans market, and the meadows in the bloom. I will pay $1,200 to $1,250 for number one young men, and $850 to $1,000 for number one young women, while the birds make music all the day. In fact, I will pay more for likely Negroes. Weep no more, my lady. Oh, weep no more today than any trader in Kentucky. We sing one song. My office is adjoining the Broadway Hotel for my old Kentucky home. On Broadway, Lexington, Kentucky, for my old Kentucky home far away, where I or my agent can always be found. To me, that emotional current that hopefully you felt when I read that poem characterizes the kind of dissonance that exists around that song in this state. And I believe Stephen Foster wrote state songs for two other states, and at least one of those states has changed their state song already. Kentucky is decidedly behind. This is another example of an additional non-traditional form that tries to tell a story historically and tries to celebrate, what poetry can do. If you look on the left, there are two ads. One is for a stolen, quote unquote, stolen horse, and the second ad is for a runaway. If you take time to read these ads, you recognize that they're connected. The runaway is on that horse, but if you look at how they're ranked, one is implied to have more value than the other. I was really taken with these two ads, and I wanted to try to do something on the page that celebrated this idea, this kind of dichotomy of, hey, how do you have this double conversation? So this is the form called contrapuntal. And one side of this poem is about the selling of bodies. The other side of the poem is about the selling of horses. Uh, but it can be read three ways. It can be read as a whole poem without the space in the middle, or a poem on the left versus a poem on the right. I'm going to read it in two ways. The first one's separate and then together, so you can hear the difference. Backside of my old Kentucky home. Backside is also a reference for not being in the grandstands at the horse race. There's a grandstands where all the people with the money and owners and spectators who want to be entertained sit, and then the backside is where all the workers gather and all the jockeys return to before and after each race. So backside of my old Kentucky home. At our estates, we sat on the side porch, stared at humble cabins as young bucks worked and sweated in the fields and sang and danced. We could smell sour mash and brandies and cast iron skillets full of nothing but love. Those were good old days. Breaking them was more Christian than selling them. On horse farms, we sipped mint juleps, looked out over the hills, rode our thoroughbreds, raced each other in the meadows to earn Sundays off to eat. The best fried chicken cooked in large kettles and pots. Seasoned genius in every dish. For owners and families, carefully breeding them was more profitable on the auction block. And here it is together. At our estates, on horse farms, we sat on the side porch. We sipped mint juleps, stared at humble cabins, looked out over the hills as young bucks rode our thoroughbreds, worked and sweated in the fields, raced each other in the meadows, and sang and danced to earn Sundays off to eat. We could smell the best fried chicken, sour mash, and brandies cooked in large kettles and pots, and cast iron skillets full of seasoned genius, nothing but love in every dish. Those were good old days for owners and families. Breaking them, carefully breeding them was more Christian, was more profitable than selling them on the auction block. So hopefully you can see how those ideas inspire or evolve into this form called a contrapuntal on the page. You know, my challenge as a historical poet is satisfy fans of poetry and to satisfy people who are just interested in the historical value of the event or the time period of the individual. Here's another example. I won't read this one, but this is a form called a polyphonic. And you see three different columns. And this can actually be read in 5 different ways. And it tries to talk about 2 kind of sad incidents that happened. One connected to a massacre of African-American troops, and the other connected to what they called a displacement of human beings, you know, trying to be, you know, very neutral, sterile about what really happened, but they basically kicked out all the families connected to these African-American soldiers before it became legal to have them there and set up this official refugee camp. And when they did, over 100 of them died of exposure in one weekend. And it's because of those deaths that the War Department weighed in and forced that camp to set up a refugee space for the family members and to keep those soldiers happy. So that's just called how SALT works. I'll move to the next one. I mentioned Mary Edlin's Mark earlier, and this is a poem that actually deals with me responding to her mark and what I imagine she might have thought about that mark, seeing it on the page. So I'll just read this one. It's called Affidavits, in the voice of Mary X. Edlin, a Civil War widow. Them make me scratch out an X in ink with 2 witnesses on affidavits to prove me and Randall was married. I fetched affidavits from every doctor still living that examined my husband's pals and old man's bladder, witnessed his pain and still doubted his suffering while he rot from the inside. Them even bade me to make my mark after David with more witnesses to prove my Randall was dead and gone. They made me X the page with witnesses so many times on so many pension papers that though I cannot read or write a lick, I come to recognize my own name when I see it. The fancy M on Mary come to look like a woman keep changing her mind. And the E, them like to put on Evelyn, a tired old biddy in a bonnet who done set herself down and quit. I first think my mark looked like a tired old cross, but after a while, I come to see a long, sharp knife like my Randall's old scabbard from the war. And if you look at that mark between her mark and between Mary and Evelyn, I think it's fairly easy to see that and see it as something like a sword, or as they called it during the Civil War, a scabbard. To me, that was a way to have her be a little defiant and show some resilience, because she fought for 10 years to get this pension, and she didn't give up. So that says something about her character, and I want to make sure that she was represented well in this collection. Another example and another new form is a golden shovel. And in a golden shovel, you get one poem and you get a hidden poem. And for the sake of the conversation, I've colorized the hidden poem that you get, or part of a poem. And some of you may recognize this Paul Dunbar stanza it's from the poem We Wear the Mask. And the lines for that poem is, we wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. If you read this other poem, you won't hear that poem unless you read down the edge. That's why I've colorized it for you. But I'll read this poem and move to the next one. But this is a poem that tries to celebrate the person missing in the conversation. Paul Laurence Dunbar is fairly celebrated. What people don't know is Paul Laurence Dunbar's father is from Kentucky, and he self-liberated or escaped north to join the Union Army. He survived the war, but he was fairly damaged afterwards and took out much of that, his own torture on his wife. So there was a pretty unpleasant domestic situation. And because his wife got left out of the story so often, this poem is really dedicated to Matilda Dunbar in the voice of the son, Paul Laurence Dunbar, about their whole family situation. So, Golden Shovel for Matilda Dunbar in the voice of Paul Laurence Dunbar. I wish, but I can't say there was ever such thing as a we. I know Papa wore a soldier's uniform longer than he could wear the mantle of husband or father. Who could know which of the horrors, slavery in Kentucky or war, would break him, make him mask himself, refuse the generosity and love you had to offer, that you poured generously onto me? A childhood filled with grins was part of my reward, though marked with his absence and his unkindness towards you. He left me with only the half lies about his exploits during battle. When he recalled and told it, he tried to disguise all the pain, sorrow, and grief that hides beneath even the most musical of tongues, deep up under our laughter. You always wanted to see joy in my eyes and cheeks, or a book in my hand. You smiled at my fatherless dreams and reminded me to listen to how the music in his story shades and protects and spreads joy on its listeners, always making our sad father, our gallant colored soldier, more heroic in my eyes. And that quotation around gallant colored soldier is just a kind of a skewed reference to a poem that Dunbar wrote about Civil War soldiers called Gallant Colored Soldiers. So you see how all those pieces fit together. This next poem is the title poem for the collection, Loaded 9 Times. And most people are unfamiliar with the term unless they're Civil War buffs or fans, but Loaded 9 Times are the actual instructions for how to load and fire a Civil War era rifle. And if you look at this colorized version of the poem, in the book, it appears all in black, but for the sake of this conversation, I've colorized the 3 different parts of the poem. In red, you see the actual orders that the sergeant gives that allows the soldiers to follow and perform the commands all at the same time, so that when you see that these recreations, that this big cloud of smoke is because everybody fires at the same time. The middle part that's in black is actually the physical movement the bodies make in response to the orders. And the third column in green is what I imagine is an internal monologue by a soldier who's trying to imagine what would happen in a certain situation. So I'm going to read it in twice. I'll read the first and second column together, and then I'll read the first and third column together, because there are many ways to read this poem, including all three at the same time, but I want you to hear the difference. Load in 9 times. John Burnside, Company K, 124th Regiment, U.S. Colored Troops. Load! Sit butt of musket on the ground. Handle cartridge. Pull paper cartridge from box. Tear cartridge. Use teeth to rip top off. Charge cartridge. Put gunpowder in its mouth. Add round. Ram cartridge. Pull metal rod from gun. Push it down the throat of the musket. Return rammer. Return metal rod. Prime. Cock gun and seat cap. Shoulder arms. Wait for orders. Ready. Squeeze the trigger. Aim. And then fire. And then the second version. And the second version is inspired by a scene from the movie Glory, where the sergeant is firing a pistol in the ear of a recruit while he's trying to load the rifle and fire it, but he is not able to complete the task. And for me, that inability to fulfill the task kind of reflected the mood in the country when a lot of people resisted the idea of African Americans joining as soldiers. You know, there was this idea that they didn't have enough courage, that they weren't mentally strong enough, that they couldn't complete the task. But I asked myself, what if they were properly motivated? So this version is in response to the proper motivation. Load in 9 times. John Burnside, Company K, 124th Regiment, U.S. Colored Troops. Load! I wonder. Handle cartridge. If I look down, tear cartridge, the business end. Charge cartridge of my musket. Ram cartridge and see old master. Return rammer. Standing there. Prime. If I will hesitate. Shoulder arms or remember. Ready. How many times? Aim. He beat my wife. Fire. Hope you can appreciate the power of that. If you get to DC, or if you live in the area, you've probably already seen the Spirit of Freedom, the Civil War Monument at 10th and U Streets. What you may not know is that sculptor, Ed Hamilton, is also from Kentucky. So we're very proud of the fact. And what you also might not know when you first see the monument is that on the front side of this, you see the soldiers, and on the right, some Navy soldiers as well. But on the back side, in this concave part, they're actually the families that travel and were part of this experience, especially in Kentucky, when you consider spaces like the refugee camp. This is another close-up of Mary Edlin's signature, which I talked about earlier. At the monument, the names of all the participants, all the soldiers who fought as African-American men who were signed up as members. You can find their names on the wall. And this is my fingernail almost touching my third great-great-grandfather, Randall Edlin, on that wall. So I'm very proud of that. Finding that the first time was a very tearful moment, because I had been there before, but had not done enough research to know where to look. And I'll pause for a second here while you look at the cover of the book that we're discussing, which is dedicated to Mary and Randall Edlin, 125th U.S. Colored Infantry, and Elvira and Henry Clay Walker, the 12th U.S. Colored Troops Heavy Artillery, both stationed at Camp Nelson, which is probably about 20 minutes from where I grew up and was born. So If we can switch back to all the heads as part of this conversation and start bringing in some of the questions that you already had that I didn't answer already, or that may be coming from the audience. We can't see, but I hope they're out there.
Yeah, we've got a lot of comments. I have to say that was just amazing and a powerful presentation. And having read the book, and because of the collection is so moving and such an incredible work of historiography, I had also done sort of like some research off the side. But what you just presented was so fulsome and amazing. Thank you very much. I do want to share, we had a question from a viewer as you were doing the presentation. Dr. Stewart's here actually with a class as well. So welcome to Dr. Stewart and the class. And Dr. Stewart is wondering if you have any advice on archival or genealogy research.
Other than do it. I think every family has an unofficial genealogist, and most of the good work is driven by archival material. I would say the most important thing to do is to interview the oldest relatives in the family before they pass on. Not only collect, but I would say invest in a portable scanner and go visit everybody and scan their photo albums and get that material, because most people have that material, but they don't want to give it away. And they're afraid that if they loan it, it won't come back. But if you take over a portable scanner, or your cell phone with the right app, you can upload that information, digitize it, and start putting it in a kind of common family tree that, just imagine the family tree where everybody on the tree is more than a name. There's also an image to go with that person. That you can do that with all this new technology. And travel or log on to all the places that have archival material, because they've uploaded so many newspapers. And if you have documents connected to Civil War soldiers, that information is available, in National Archives in DC, in local historical records places. They're in Kentucky through the Reckoning Inc. All the soldiers' records have been uploaded, starting with Jefferson County, and that's slowly spread to other counties in the state. At some point, they will have 27,000 sets of records all uploaded, and you'll be able to log on from wherever you are and just click on the right links and find that information. But I would say, to repeat that, do the research, find archival information, visit your county libraries, university libraries, see what they have in archives. A lot of archival information may not be cataloged online, but if you go to the actual space, they can pull up something for you. That's a short version.
Thank you very much. I'll share a couple more comments from Dr. Stewart's class, and then maybe Audrey, I know you got some great history questions. So Dr. Stewart's class is just sharing some thoughts. One student has said, oftentimes we pray together and other times we pray together. And someone is also wondering who, if any particular person, is your favorite literary artist and why? This person who's sharing said that their favorite is Amira Bakara.
Yeah, I'm also a Baraka fan. I appreciate your taste in poets. I appreciate all the poets from his era, of particularly, Mama Sonia Sanchez. We recently lost Nikki Giovanni from the same era. I have a lot of respect for the poets who came before me. I'm in love with a lot of contemporary poets right now, but mostly because I teach full-time, the work I'm reading is usually my students, and found out how amazing their work is. I teach an MFA program at University of Kentucky, and we have some of the top students in the country and from the UK and other countries and the Caribbean, and they're writing at the top of their game, and I'm always amazed at the quality of what they're pushing out there into the world. But if I had to choose one, because I'm still feeling sentimental, I'm going to say Nikki Giovanni.
All right, I will ask. I have two questions. But you, one of the quotes that you have at the beginning of your book is a quote I'm very familiar with. Captain Robert Goldshaw, who was the headed the 54th Massachusetts. So I was curious. You included, "We fight for men and women whose poetry is not yet written." And that's not quite right. And I feel like that's very indicative of Robert Goldshaw in general, the abolitionist who kind of sits back from the, he was initially in the 2nd Massachusetts and moved over to the 54th to kind of, have this chance at, they call him the blue-eyed child of fortune. But I was just curious, talk about the lie of this statement.
Well, I think it showed how limited his education was and what happens when you don't, when you have inadequate or kind of limited education. His worldview was smaller. I think he believed that was the truth, but I also think he was not reading the African-American poets of the day. What I love about that same page is that, there are other quotes that showcase that lie, that, and the same page that gives that quote is followed by 2 other quotes that are by African-American poets. So it proves the lie of, without calling him a liar. If you're paying attention, you see exactly what is happening, and he's refuted twice on the same page, but he tells his truth. So it's still respectful to him while acknowledging his lie at the same time.
And I don't know that he was so, I know sometimes that it's not necessarily what he meant. And I know he ended up he ended up with his men. His body was not cared for as it was in the movie. But one of the reasons why I came to history was because of him. I read his biography and I was like, wow, he's not really what he said he was going to be. And then I kind of went down this road of Civil War. But it was a really neat way to come to something, I think, because as a youngster, that was the first time I knew that Black men fought for their own freedom. And I think that glory, in some ways, was a beginning for a lot of us. But anyway, back to the last one I'd really like to talk about is your poem, Boogeyman. And I don't need you to read it. But one of the things that maybe our viewers might like to know is that a lot of the men that you quote and you talk about in your collection would have fought or been at some very terrible battles, including the Crater, Saltville, Fort Pillow. And I guess one of the things, and we can talk about that, but one of the things I was curious about is I always heard the story about the Crater from the Pennsylvania miner side. How they, tunneled underneath the Confederates and blew up this huge hole, and killed all these Confederates. But afterwards, you have this Union Army that rushes forward into the hole, and most of those soldiers were U.S. colored troops. And we weren't really told about the massacre that happened afterward. And I guess I want people to realize that the Civil War, the cause of the war and the strife that this country has kind of dealt with really is about the moments after that explosion. And I was just kind of wondering what you thought about the difference between these ghosts of, Civil War soldiers that die in these bloody situations. What do you think about when you think about these sites? Because I know what I think about when I go to them, and I think about these young men who are kind of left behind on this field.
Well, my first thought is that, I'm reminded that whoever tells the story controls the narrative. And to me, that means it's even more important that more points of view become part of the conversation, and it's part of the motivation for telling my story. I think about, as popular as the movie Glory is, it's, if I could choose one story to tell, it wouldn't have been that one. I think the Crater, Fort Pillow is probably the movie I would make. Most people have no idea what Fort Pillow is or what happened there, but it's such an important part of the story of the Civil War, as is, Kentucky's contribution to it, that people believe this very kind of thin notion, in the same way that people believe Martin Luther King gave one speech and it said, "I have a dream," and it was the end. It's like, his published speeches is a book about 3.5, 4 inches thick, but we still focus on that one thing because it helps control a narrative about what he believed. And he was a very different man at the end of his life than the person represented in the "I Have a Dream" speech, in the same way that, our take on history and how it's presented is shaped and skewed by how it's told. So for me, I think all those stories need to be told in a very full and balanced way. And it can only be done if all the stories are included. We just can't celebrate the battles of, there's this, even at Camp Nelson, it's finally a national site. They're starting to tell the story, but I'm embarrassed by the fact that, I managed to graduate from high school and never heard any history connected specifically to Kentucky other than a battle happened at Perryville. That was it. Nothing about U.S. colored troops, nothing about the large numbers of troops, nothing about Kentucky's contribution, only that at the end of the war, slavery was still legal in Kentucky. I mean, that was the other thing that I thought was important. But they leave out, some critical things. Like, even one of my third great grandfathers enlisted in the Union Army 3 days after the war ended. And he did so because he automatically became a free man, because slavery was legal in Kentucky, but so did his children and his wife, all with the signature of his pen. So there are all these African-American men who rushed to join the Union Army to get that freedom. They were so committed to their freedom that's the story that I think needs to be told. That would make a Spielberg or Ava DuVernay movie that hasn't been made yet.
Kyla, Tiana.
Yeah, well, actually, well, first of all, I'm so glad that you read Backside of My Old Kentucky Home. That was a poem that when I read the collection, I was just like, this is just breathtaking. I was wondering if I could put how salt works back on the screen. You don't need to read it, but you mentioned during the presentation that it could be read 5 ways. And I was just wondering if you could tell our viewers, so when they are looking at their own collections, like how to approach this.
Well, their own collections, if they're writing it, or
like the copy of your, when they're looking at their this book and they're looking at it and they come to this one, how do you want them to attack it?
Yeah, I think trust your intuition. Just know that the idea of this poem is that this is about 2 separate events, but a lot of what happened in both spaces. The horror part of it was duplicated. So you can read the left column by itself, the right column by itself. You can read the first and middle column as one poem. You can read the middle and right column as one poem. You can read all of them all together as one poem, first, second, and third column. But it would just repeat the same story because it starts the same and it ends the same. It has the same result. And the fact that salt, it happened at Saltville, Virginia, at the salt mine or the salt works. There's salt in tears. Both of these situations cause a lot of pain and sorrow and salt. And that's just how salt works, And so the play on words, the kind of freedom of how to read it is up to the reader, but I think that you'll get the same result no matter how you get to the end.
Well, it is just so extraordinary. I'll just take a moment to just say to people who are watching, sometimes people can feel anxiety about poetry, right? Like, I just think that's real. Sometimes I do a lot of reading and writing, and I meet people who are like, I don't love poetry because we don't necessarily know how to approach it. And so one of the things I do want to say for people who are watching, like, this collection, like, is absolutely amazing and so rich in the history and approachability and catching these voices. I think that Professor X's presentation shows some of that. So I really do want to just encourage you to not be afraid and to check it out. And then I will mute myself, but it really is extraordinary. It's really, really good.
Thank you for that. I think most people get scared out of poetry when they meet that first Shakespearean sonnet in middle school and then think this has nothing to do with me. And so they run from poetry forever. But, I was trying to do the exact opposite of that when I'm writing, especially historical poetry. I want the voices to ring with a kind of authenticity. And it's important that the story is accessible and the form brings people closer to the story, not pushes them away. And also try to have fun on the page. And it's hard to have fun with such a heavy topic. You can't really romanticize war. But there are jokes in here. There are even some of the jokes that that are kind of bittersweet. When you try to imagine what's the humorous situation here, how did they get through this war? I think this collection has everything, I hope people find their way into it and out of it and can appreciate how much more is available if you also read the notes and read the timeline and read, you can skip the bibliography unless you're doing some additional research. But those two things will add. Some people read the poems and flash to the notes back and forth. But I think that's slower. But what do I know? I'm just a poet.
I actually wanted to follow up on Kyla's question. How do you go about writing poems like House Taught Works or Backside of My Old Kentucky Home? Like, how do you write a poem that can be read in multiple different ways?
Well, I think you start with reading them, understanding how they move and how they are designed to move. So it helps having some examples. It's hard to go from 0 to 50 without going through 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 40, all the way to 49. Like Lead Belly, a collection of poems by Tahimbe Jess, has probably the best examples of contrapuntals I've ever seen. You can also go to the Poetry Foundation online and just pop in the glossary contrapuntal and pull up, some other examples. They have Poetry Foundation has probably the best examples of ABCDarians and contrapuntals, burning high buns. All the new contemporary golden shovels. We learn sonnets and haiku in traditional schools, but most of this new stuff happening that is really exciting for poets writing today, myself included, is not being taught in classrooms yet. But if you find the books that are using those forms and you learn those poems, then it becomes easier to imagine doing them yourself.
Do you think we have enough time for one more question? One of the things that I wanted to just kind of ask briefly is the longest poem in here is called Let My People Go. Mm-hmm. And I was curious, was it based on anything that you found in terms of a sermon, or was it just kind of the way you imagined that this character kind of this person went through the war?
Well, I think because, that person was a minister, it made sense to me to have his voice kind of celebrate the fact that he was immersed in this biblical tradition and ministering in a full-time way. The form itself is called a heroic crown of sonnets, and so it's 15 sonnets that the end of one becomes the beginning of the next one all the way through, and it's intended to be read as a long extended sermon about his entire life, because he joined the Union Army before he was a soldier. He was attached to the Union Army as a worker, had been leased to the Union Army by his master. And then once he had a chance to sign up and become a soldier himself, he did so immediately and became a free man. But he stayed there ministering to thousands of soldiers and their families, and became so involved in it that he stayed on even after the war. Eventually, he gave up on Kentucky because of the horrible pushback and domestic terrorism that happened to ex-soldiers, former soldiers in Kentucky, that, you know, that's also erased from history. He just gave up and became part of the out migrants into Kansas and became part of the exodusters. And I think he helped found Nicodemus after giving up on Kentucky. I mean, there's so much history there. His story cannot be captured in a single poem.
We just have, this is great. I will second this, but I would just real quickly ask, do you have other books that you've written that are similar to this that maybe you could recommend to our audience? Because I think we have some new fans.
Sure. Historical poetry is out there. It's not a category for it yet in bookstores and libraries. But for me, I have my collection of York, Lewis and Clark and York. To me, I think of them in three. Buffalo Dance, The Journey of York is the first book in the trilogy of collections about the Lewis and Clark expedition, but told from the point of view of York, William Clark's manservant. The second of those is called When Winter Come, that incorporates more voices, women's voices, Native American voices, that tells the story in a broader way. And the third version hasn't been published yet, so I can't even say the title yet, but it's also been used as a script for a feature film that's already started pre-production. There's also a collection about Medgar Evers called, what's the Medgar book called? It's on my shoulder. I'm rushing, but it's escapes my mind. I'm thinking
Turn Me Loose.
Turn Me Loose. And a third one that I was confusing it with is called I Dedicate This Ride. It's a book about Isaac Murphy, the African-American jockey in Kentucky. But Turn Me Loose is about Medgar Evers. Dedicate This Ride is about Isaac Murphy. The York books are about the Lewis and Clark expedition. And then this collection is about the Civil War. So I think that's most time periods in history. You know, there may be some gaps in there somewhere. But that'll be the next book.
All right, y'all, we heard it here. So I'm going to be the bad guy again. And unfortunately, we've run out of time. Professor X, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much for your readings. Congratulations on this book. I think we've converted more than a few to a new type of book. Thank you to the audience. Whether you're watching live or on demand later, you are why we do what we do. One of the best ways that you can support our guests are to get their books. You can buy Professor X's incredible Load in 9 Times and any of his other books at your favorite independent bookstore, or check them out from the library. I'm returning mine today. So we hope you'll join us for our next Lunch and Learn, which will be in 2 weeks. April 8th, we are in conversation with historian Philip Deloria. Every Tuesday in April, the Office of Human Rights will be at the Glen Arden Branch Library from 4:30 to 5:30 for the Youth Leadership Academy, which invites kids from 12 and older to learn about social justice, human trafficking, and disinformation. We have even more coming up next month. So check out OHR's website at civilrights.mypgc.us and find out all the amazing things that we have at our library every day at pgcmls.info/events. Thank you again, Professor X, for joining us. And we want everyone to have a lovely day. Thank you. Bye-bye.